Here we are in the final week of the election trail. So what are our politicians promising, and who will Canadians put their trust in? Joining us today is the Honourable Stockwell Day, former leader of the official opposition and former cabinet minister and Prime Minister Stephen Harper's Conservative government. He's also currently serving as the president of Stockwell Day Connects. Welcome, Stockwell. Great to have you with us today.
Hi, Jeanette. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Okay, only a week to go, and the polls are showing the Liberals with an 8-point lead. So what do you make of that?
Well, if you're a conservative, it's concerning, but we used to like to say, we always say during an election, always run as if you're a few points behind, because that may be the reality. Polling is really tricky these days because so many people do not even bother answering either, well, certainly landlines, but even if they see that that it's a polling survey, many don't answer. So it's always tricky, but there is a trend line, and the trend line, to be honest, looks like the Liberals may have a bit of an edge here.
Okay, the Liberals have now released their costed platform, and Mark Carney is promising to spend a whole lot of money. So what do you think of his plans?
Well, if you look at them carefully or even just quickly, you'll see that spending is clearly on their agenda. And that's at a time where, certainly as a small c fiscal conservative, I believe, and having worked with leaders who also believe that we've got to be a little more circumspect about our spending and keep deficit down, because if you can't keep the deficit down, you're not going to keep your interest payments down, and it makes everything less affordable. So I'm concerned, quite honestly, about the Liberal trajectory. There doesn't seem to be enough emphasis on really reining in spending, and that's going to be a real concern going forward.
Now, the Conservatives have not released their costed platform just yet. Poilievre is saying that this will happen Tuesday, but the NDP have released theirs. And again, big spending and higher taxes for the wealthy. So do you think Jagmeet Singh has found any traction in this last week?
The polls indicate that he hasn't really, and his polling numbers continue to drop. So what you're going to see is the people who were previously voting NDP, which is of course a significantly leftist vote, some of those, a good percentage of those, migrating over to the Liberals, which is why the Liberals are keeping their spending high and talking about keeping taxes high, because they know that will attract NDP voters. So it's an interesting collaboration that's taking place sort of before our eyes there.
What do you suspect that Poilievre's will look like?
Well, you'll see a little more fiscal restraint. You'll see a real focus on one of his concerns that he continues to focus on is affordability. And really, the fact that we live in a time, I was just talking about within my own family here, where we used to, when we were starting out as young families and married and becoming upwardly mobile, we used to be able to have a pretty good chance of getting a down payment together and affording a home. And that seems to be more and more of a fleeting hope. And what you're going to see, I believe, from Pierre Poilievre and his team will be ways in which that'll be more achievable and things becoming more affordable. Part of that is, of course, reining in the public debt, but it's also making life easier for small business and for people who are just trying to get ahead.
Now, Stockwell, we keep hearing this election is about Canadian sovereignty and the threat of Trump tariffs, but do you think this is the case, or are there more pressing issues like affordability? I mean, after all, Trump's only been in for 3 months now in office, and there were a lot of issues prior to that people weren't happy with.
Well, great question. And it ties into that because everybody knows that tariff wars usually do not turn out very well. As a matter of fact, the history book of successful tariff wars is a pretty thin one. So I'm concerned about tariffs. I certainly was when I was Minister of Trade. Pierre Poilievre, very concerned about those also. So it really underlines the emphasis on keeping our own spending priorities in line in terms of the Canadian government, because the less you're able to control your own spending and therefore taxes and therefore debt, the less you're going to be able to fight a tariff war. So the tariff issue is big. Pierre has shown that he's very adept and he's being very aggressive against the US approach right now, against the Trump approach on tariffs. So it's going to be, tariffs are figuring large in this election for sure.
Do you think this election is really about Canadian sovereignty?
Well, we keep hearing that President Trump is talking about 51st state. We know that he sees the world certainly from a lot different point of view than most Canadians. And Pierre Poilievre and the vast majority of Canadians do not see Canada as a 51st state by any means. Part of, I think, analyzing Trump over the years, he likes to come in with a bazooka. I'll use that analogy. And then when you only feel like you got hit or punched and not hit with a bazooka, you feel like you're coming away ahead of the game. So he comes in, he'll come in talking about a 51st state, hoping that that will create some chaos and over exaggerated fears. But I think what you're seeing right now is Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives, being pretty level headed on this. They're not going to let that throw them off their target of keeping Canada strong, keeping Canada in a strong fiscal position. But it's certainly part of what Trump uses as a strategic and maybe even a long-term goal. I don't think it'll ever be a reality, but it's something that he's tossing out there to keep people on their back feet, so to speak.
Keep us on our toes for sure. Now, Mark Carney has been under pressure over his refusal to reveal his assets, tax havens, and his alleged Chinese business connections. So far, this hasn't seemed to have put a dent in the poll numbers. So any thoughts on why these issues seem to be just bouncing off?
Yeah, it's pretty clear to me, and it's not a surprise, that mainstream media clearly leans to the left. That's something nobody really argues about. And so they want to see a liberal government continue, just as they wanted to see Justin Trudeau stay in place. They want to see Mark Carney stay in place. So they will mention those things, which you've quite rightly just raised, but they won't overemphasize them. And the problem there, Jeanette, is elections in democracies like Canada, where you've got two main parties, are largely decided at the end of the day by the undecided voters. And undecided voters, which anytime can be 6 to 9 or 10% of the vote, they largely will be affected by the last people they talk to on any issue. And the last people the undecided hear from is always mainstream media. So that's the concern. Mainstream media knows that, and so they don't overly focus on that. These are items that should be focused on. Their mainstream is not focusing on them, so a large part of the undecided aren't hearing the concerns that are very real related to Mr. Carney.
Interesting. So Pierre Poilievre has been bringing up tough on crime and public safety issues. So how big of an issue is this in the key Ontario and Quebec swing ridings, do you think?
Well, it's a concern, and it's interesting you mentioned the two provinces because they look at things somewhat differently. In Quebec, of course, immigration would be a much higher concern. It's somewhat of a concern in Ontario for sure. And it really comes down to the question of illegal immigration. And most people who are new Canadians or even have been first and second generation Canadians are united on the fact that illegal immigration is a concern, not just from a Canadian safety point of view, but if we're hoping to push back on the tariff attack that Trump has launched into, we do need to show that we are responsible when it comes to the types of people we're letting into our country. So those issues are of a concern, and Ontario and Quebec, they do share those concerns. Again, it's really important to be focusing on them along with these issues of affordability.
Our national debt is massive, and that really needs to change. So, if we think about what this means to future generations, obviously we want to see change there. But voters don't usually like to hear about spending cuts during an election. And Pierre Poilievre says that we should cut back on foreign aid spending. And Carney says Canada needs to extend compassion to the world. So, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, you have to look at the type of foreign aid that our own Canadian taxpayer dollars are going to. And is it going to support programs in other countries that we think are valuable and helpful to that country? So foreign aid should be looked at. Are we supporting bad actors out there? Are we supporting programs which we would never support in Canada? That's where the focus needs to be.
Mm. You understand how government functions, obviously. So, where else can we cut back on spending to rein in our huge debts?
Well, we've got to take a realistic approach to the size and the growth of government. We live in an era where technology and AI is providing fantastic ways to reduce costs. You know, it used to be that even someone in my position, running a company, you'd need sometimes maybe two people or maybe three people just to help with scheduling and travel, et cetera, an executive assistant type of thing. And
Mhm.
now with AI, you can do that virtually, in a very minimal way when it comes to personnel. So that's just one small example, Janetta, right across the board. AI is helping us to be more efficient. So you do not have to be increasing the size of government at any level, municipal, provincial, federal. We need to see a reality come into place. You don't have to be saying you're going to just lay off all kinds of people. You can just say you're holding the line, but the Liberals are not doing that. The increase in the number of public servants being hired across the country through the Trudeau years and now into the Carney years, it's staggering, really. And that's a long cost. Every time you hire a full-time government employee at any level, that's about a 50-year commitment, in terms of financially. And if you're going to try and reduce that, it becomes very expensive. So let's look at the size of government. Let's look at the way we are doing things. And there are some achievable savings there without being really disruptive. But we've got to correct uh, this out of control increase in the size of the public service right across the country.
So, shrinking government. I think some people sometimes get a little bit iffy when they hear AI taking over people's jobs and stuff. It's the
Well,
world we're living
the
in.
great, yeah, and the great thing is you can use AI to say, okay, we're not looking at mass layoffs, but where can we, you look at just attrition, Jeanette, the number of people that are retiring every year. It used to be about 11 to 13% of the public service retiring. So you don't even have to come in swinging, and saying, oh, we're just going to slash the public service. Let's make it more efficient. Let's be aware that thousands are retiring every year. You don't have to be continuing to increase the size, especially with the technological capabilities that we have now.
Yeah, you mentioned people retiring. So here's an interesting twist in this election: is that seniors are leaning towards the Liberals and the younger people towards the Conservatives. So traditionally, younger folks don't show up in big numbers to vote. So is this going to be a problem, do you think, in this election, particularly for the Conservatives?
Well, I think it could be, and I say as a parent, but also a grandparent, the tremendous opportunities we had when we were young in our 20s and 30s, and getting together a down payment for a house, for instance. Young people don't have that now, and so I'm saying to my fellow parents and fellow grandparents, hey. Look, we're approaching the end of the line. Let's be realistic about that. But our kids and our grandkids are not, and to continue this liberal pathway of upward spending and no regard for the cost of living of young people, we're actually kind of being selfish towards our own kids and our own grandkids. So, we're going to be okay. We'll eke it out. And, I don't want to sound morbid here, but we'll eke it out in our remaining years. But let's give our kids and grandkids a chance. Those chances will be very limited with an ongoing liberal program.
All right, it looks like we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I'm going to ask you one more question here, Stockwell. What kind of character traits should Canadian voters be looking for in their next PM?
Well, clearly truthfulness and integrity and being willing to speak to a position, whatever it might be, and not just be controlled by, oh, is this going to cost me some votes? I mean, there's a couple of issues out there. The gender issue, for once, or for one, Pierre Poilievre has been very clear that he thinks girls should be protected as far as sports goes, not to be having to compete against biological males, and protected spaces for women in that regard. He's been very clear on that. And Mark Carney hasn't. He keeps dodging the issue. And then you go from there to something like an environmental issue like pipelines. Pierre has also been very clear that we can safely have pipelines built that would be able to export our refined products even to places like Europe so that they don't have to depend overly on Putin, or to places like China to get them to reduce their coal. So we could increase that and still see global emissions reduced. But there's the whole fear that, oh, well, are the climate activists going to get upset and take away some of your votes? So questions like these require integrity and require a leader who's going to say, you know what? I'm going to take the right position on this. I'm going to say and do what is right, not just what's politically correct. On that issue, obviously, I lean towards Pierre Poilievre making those kind of policy statements.
All right. Well, looks like we're out of time here. Stockwell, thanks so much for taking your time, taking time with us to share your views about this next coming election.
Great to be with you, and thanks for everything you do with your show in terms of reaching out to Canadians.